Welcome everybody to the first of hopefully many webinars for Simply R&D. My name is Scott Coggle. I'm the R&D advisor for Simply R&D. It's my job to try and make sense of all the many changes that HMRC are making constantly at the moment, and prepare the reports. It's a job I really enjoy doing, but it's getting just trying to figure out the best way, what we're tackling and what's next can be quite confusing. I'd also like to introduce you to my partner in crime today, Derek from Aries Growth. Hi, Derek.
Hi, Scott. Nice to see you. David, how are you?
I'm well. Great this morning.
I quite like the fact that you call me your partner in crime, although hopefully we won't be committing any crimes today. Yeah, no, really good to be here. Yeah, I hope you find this session valuable. I think certainly from our point of view, what I'll do before I go any further, I'll just share my screen so that we've got the presentation up there. Bear with me for just a wee second to find it. And hopefully this is about to go in the presenter zone. Can David or Scott, can you confirm if you can see my presentation? Excellent. Oh well, that was the first bit. Tick. We've done that. It's always a worry for some reason, even though like these things have been going on for such a long time. Yeah, so anyway, in terms of the intros, I suppose just to give you a wee bit of background, I recognise a couple of the names of people that are on the call who may know me, but yeah, so my company, Aris Growth, relatively new company. I launched it almost a year ago. Previous to that, I've been in the R&D industry for the last 15 years. I've worked with accountants, with some of the most well-known boutique R&D advisors, and latterly with one of the big four accountancy firms. I headed up a team there who were focused on helping SMEs to access R&D tax credits. So got a fair amount of experience in this, but what I try and do is I try and speak in plain English because it's quite a complicated and quite a dry subject area. And to be honest, a lot of the time when I go on these webinars, there's bits that I don't understand, and also I find them quite boring. So hopefully we can present this in a way to yourselves that's slightly less boring, certainly in plain English and in a way that people can understand. And if off the back of that, you want to have a more detailed conversation, I don't want to speak for Scott, but I'm sure that both Scott and I would be more than happy to have a conversation offline. So that's a wee bit of the intro. In terms of what we're going to get through today and the overview, I think it was David that coined the title for the webinar, "The Truth About R&D Tax Credits." I don't know if we're going to divulge any secrets or anything like that, but certainly what we want to do is we want to make it a bit clearer for people in terms of you know, what the scheme is, what it's there for, and how you can best utilise it going forward. But before we do that, I thought it would be useful to just address the elephant in the room, and with that is the scrutiny that we've seen in the R&D tax credit space in the last couple of years. Now, as someone who is consumed by the R&D industry, my LinkedIn feed and newsletters and things that I get and conversation I get, I'm constantly hearing about negative stuff in relation to R&D tax credits. Those on the call, I'm sure you've got far better things to do with your time, and you may not be exposed to as much as it, but I think most people in business, certainly in businesses that are innovating, will be aware to some degree of the level of scrutiny from HMRC and the negative press that the scheme has had over the last couple of years. The reality is that there was a lot of abuse of the R&D tax credit scheme over the last 10 years, but more so during the COVID period when HMRC's eyes were focused in other areas, and unfortunately some bad actors, some cowboy R&D outfits sprung up and utilised the situation we had with COVID to their advantage, and were submitting R&D claims for companies that just should never have been anywhere near an R&D tax credit claim. Unfortunately, a lot of those businesses, it's transpired, we're not aware exactly what was going on, but there has been a lot of changes. HMRC have put a lot of things in place. Some of it has been a bit over the top, and we'll go into some of that as we go through this. But most of it was absolutely necessary. And what it's left us with now is, well, we're still trying to kind of find our way through this new landscape. Actually, it means now that going forward, those businesses that are claiming R&D tax credits are going to be businesses that should be claiming it and that are entitled to it. And as a taxpayer, we should all welcome that, because it's our money that's ultimately our taxes that are paying for this. So I wanted to get that out of the way. So that's all the negative stuff. And now let's focus on, hopefully, well, we'll still need to go through some of the negatives, I guess, as we're going through, because there has been some changes that are not for the better, but for the most part, let's focus on, you know, why this is good. Scott, anything you want to add to that?
No, it's just touching what you said. HMRC have a big impact on it recently, but which I will speak about later. But they went from investigating 1 in 100 to 1 in 5 claims, which is quite considerable a jump. I'm finding it as well. There's more and more getting asked about. Clients can come and say we're getting investigated, but the previous ones disappeared. So it's a lot of that at the moment, but hopefully, as you said, we'll settle down, and hopefully we can get into a rhythm with all the changes and just start going forward, and it's not changing too much in the future. Absolutely. He says confidently.
Yeah, and I guess, although so Simply R&D, you guys were, are the sister company of Accountants Plus, who are a very well established, successful accountancy firm based in Hamilton. I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, but I'm sure I heard her use the biggest accountancy firm or independent accountancy firm in Lanarkshire that nobody's ever heard of. I think that I'm sure I've heard somebody Accountants Plus said something along those lines.
Yes.
But one of the things for you guys, and obviously through the conversations we've had, we do a lot of work together. That really, for me, certainly made me feel that we were aligned in terms of our strategy and our missions, because I want to help innovation-led businesses to access the advice, the support and the funding they need in order to be able to scale. And certainly from speaking to yourself and Brian and Colin, it was apparent that when Simply R&D was kind of, or when it originated, it was first of all to help your existing clients, because you didn't want them being exposed to those the cowboys out there who were approaching them and saying, "You've got an R&D claim." I remember one example, and you might be able to kind of add to this a bit, of one of your clients that was approached and told that they had an R&D claim that was just never in a million years an R&D claim. But yeah, I think one of the things is that you guys are trying to keep it simple, and actually help businesses going forward, and be there to try and assist businesses so that they can take advantage of it. Which is why we're working together, because obviously I share the same thoughts. I want to try and help folk. But anyway, I'll move on from there, and we'll get into the new scheme, or the overview of the mayor's scheme. So apologies if this wee bit here sounds a bit convoluted, complex, or whatever it may be, but essentially what's happened is that there's been changes, and then there's been more changes. I'm trying to think, so there's changes and then more changes, and these changes that were made, Jesus Christ, I'm seeing a lot of changes, were certainly meant to be in order to make the R&D tax credit landscape less complicated. I speak to lots of advisors in the space, lots of businesses in the space, and most of us would say that certainly at this point in time, it's made it more complicated as opposed to making it less complicated. So we used to have 2 separate schemes, and we'll show you the rates in the next slide, but we used to have two separate schemes, one for large companies and one for SMEs. And essentially what we've done now is what the government done now is they've merged the 2 schemes. And the idea certainly for that was to simplify things and to make it easier. but also there was a recognition at government level that they were finding that they were getting more economic benefit from the large companies in terms of when they supported those businesses with R&D tax credits. The tax take at the other side of it was greater than for early stage businesses, and it was easier to identify it because of the way that the scheme worked. So they've changed it, and we've now got this merged scheme. But because of the fact that we R&D tax credits, we everything is done retrospectively. I say everything, but again, we'll touch on some ways that you can maybe do things a bit more in year, but it's done retrospectively. We're still not fully seeing how the merge scheme is coming through because it only came into effect for year end starting after the 1st of April 2024. There was changes the year before that as well, which have made it complicated. How have you found the changes, Scott? Because you're submitting claims. I don't submit them. I identify clients and help them, and then I put them to people like you.
Yeah, no, it's been tricky. The core of what is R&D hasn't changed. That's remained a constant in the middle of it. It's just really how we're claiming for it and the rates that are involved. Because just now we're jumping through. I'm doing claims, but it can be one of 3 versions.
Yeah.
So we're going through it all the time, and this could be one of 3 sets of rules, and it gets a lot to get your head round. And I do what you said about the new scheme being more simple. I think it will be once we're through it, but that's only if they stop making changes. Because I mean, when you're trying to do a return and there's 3 different possible, depending on when the year ends started and ended, it's been quite a minefield to go through, to be honest with you. It does make it a wee bit more difficult, but hopefully when we're through the other end of it, it should be a wee bit more slicker to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And on a positive note, there has been some additions in terms of some of the qualifying costs and qualifying activities, which is good. So it's not all bad news. We have seen the introduction of data costs being allowed from it was from the 1st of April 2023 that came into place, wasn't it? So that was last year, or was that this year? Again, I mean, that's the thing. I used to be able to rhyme off the rates and everything, like, without any issues at all. And now I constantly second guess myself and go, when it was that last year, or was that this year? Now, obviously, when you go to do a claim, you've got everything in front of you, so you can do that. But yeah, we do have in fact, it was the 1st of April this year. We've got the data costs, we've got the cloud computing costs now, which are included. And although not applicable to that many people, you can now claim for pure mathematics, which was previously not allowable under the R&D scheme. So the qualifying activities and expenditure has expanded, and obviously with a lot of businesses having quite considerable costs for cloud computing costs, data costs, for example, it has meant that although the rates have reduced significantly, that's kind of topped it up a wee bit. I wouldn't say it's made up the difference, certainly not in my experience, but it's at least it's been something that's been welcomed. I'm going to go into the new rates. You ready for it, Scott? We'll
yes,
flick onto this.
Let's try.
So, apologies that this slide here, I have tried to make this as simplified as I possibly can. And it's still not the most easy to read thing that you'll ever see. But essentially, if we look down the first column, we've got the I guess four main categories that we have at the moment to contend with. We've got SMEs that are profitable, SMEs that are loss making. We have the new category that was introduced on the 1st of April 2023, which is R&D intensive SMEs that are loss making. And then we have the old large company, which was the RDEC scheme, which was for companies with over 500 full-time equivalent employees and turnover of over 100 million euros that were in that. Previous to or end of March 2023, we were all pretty comfortable with these rates. You know, we knew that for an SME, it was pretty much 25%. If you spent £100,000, you were getting 24.7% back. If you were loss making, 33.4%. That was dead easy. And then for those large companies, because of the way that it's structured, it was a 10.5% post-tax benefit. Fast forward to the 1st of April, and at that point, everything changed, and the rates for SMEs went down, the rates for large companies went up, and HMRC also introduced this intensive SME rate because of the fact there was quite a big pushback about how much of an impact this was going to have on early stage startup businesses that were, pre-revenue loss-making businesses. So for businesses that are deemed to be R&D intensive, they could claim this. And for R&D intensive, just to complicate things even further, it's different for the year for the years in 2023, and then it changes again in 2024. So for for year ends starting from 1st of April 2023, you have to be deemed R&D intensive. You have to have, it has to be more than 40% of your overall turnover has to be R&D costs, and then you're in that R&D intensive category. That gets even more complicated if it's a group structure, and I won't go into that, Scott. If you want to touch that, that's up to you. But I'm going to steer clear. In 2024, and apologies that I'm bouncing about a bit here, but just to keep that kind of train of thought, they've reduced the qualifying rate for R&D intensive from 40% to 30%. So more businesses should qualify for that. But as we go to 2024, they then decided, let's just merge them all together, and we'll no longer have a large company scheme and an SME scheme. We'll have the one merged scheme that we talk about now, and it'll be an above the line tax credit. And depending on how much tax you're paying, the benefit will be, in that range, which is what you can see in the very end column. Scott, anything you want to add to that? Because you're the tax guy, so this is your domain.
Yes. No, it's quite, if you just look at it for SMEs, which is most of the ones that I deal with, to be honest with you, the SMEs, you can see the difference going from 25 roughly to about 15. If you say the average, it's a big jump down in the actual rates. But at the end of the day, it's still worth doing, because if you're doing the work and you're legitimate doing R&D, it's definitely still worth the process. And that's what we've found is a lot of the bigger companies, Derek, you touch on it yourself, you work with one, but they're not interested in the small ones anymore, so to speak. They don't find that some of the small claims are worth it, but that's where I would say we're a bit different, because anyone who's doing R&D still deserves the right to have an R&D claim prepared for them and submitted. So that's where I think we differentiate from a few other ones, the bigger ones especially, but some other ones as well, who are not really taking the small ones on board at the moment.
No, absolutely, and that's something that was a big part of my thinking to launch my own business. Without getting into too much detail, the team that I was in at EY, we were doing really well, and then with the changes to the rates, the increase in HMRC scrutiny, and the amount of our kind of real specialist technical input that we were having to utilize, it just became commercially it was unworkable, and EY took the decision that they were not going to operate in the SME market anymore. So our whole team were made redundant. No hard feelings there at all. Like it just made sense, and that's where the idea for me to launch Aris Growth came from. But I've seen that right across the industry. A lot of the more established players in the space are facing similar difficulties, and that ultimately they're there to make profit as a business. And when the risk of inquiry goes up from, as you mentioned, 1 in 100 to 1 in 5, and the rates of benefit, particularly where the fee is linked to the benefit the client gets in terms of the you know, a contingent fee. That's made it it's got it to the point for a lot of businesses, a lot of advisors, where it's unsustainable for them. I think Simply R&D are in a very fortunate position. I say fortunate, that's the wrong way of putting it, but you're one of kind of a small number of advisors that I think are very well placed to still help those early stage businesses or businesses, you know, established businesses that are doing some R&D, but it's not, you know, it's not amounting to, you know, the average R&D claim or benefit to clients now is about £60,000. It differs depending on where you are in the country, although that I'd probably suggest that was probably going to go down a little bit. But, you know, there's businesses out there that you know, could be getting, you know, £20,000-30,000 benefit back. Well, I say a lot. Most of the established R&D advisors now just can't make that work. You know, they can't service that part of the market. So there is a gap there. And as you know, I don't want to get too waylaid in it, but I certainly think that there's a space for businesses like Simply R&D that are utilising technology and that have additional services that they can offer to clients where you can service them and service them really, really well. But anyway, let's skip on from the rates. So in terms of what this means for SMEs, and we touched on that a bit there, but obviously there is a reduction in the rates. That is going to have an impact. You know, there are a lot of businesses that I've dealt with over the last 10 years that have really, or 10, 15 years, that have relied on R&D tax credits. And it was something that certainly, you know, businesses that dealt with that were looking, you know, to raise external investment, you know, VCs and the likes would expect them to be claiming R&D tax credits, you know, or at least explore that if it was available to them. It's now something that I think it's very dangerous for businesses to have this as something that they expect to get, because of the fact that HMRC have made it so difficult. So, and I know that like the VC community, you know, they're a bit concerned when it comes to R&D tax credits, and I've heard recently of instances where when they're looking at kind of forecasts and stuff like that they've excluded the R&D tax claim from it, which is a very, very different viewpoint to previously. I think for businesses, you know, in terms of planning, that it should be something that you're looking at as a nice to have, as opposed to like we absolutely need this. If you're relying on it to survive and to grow, then I think that could be dangerous. And well, I say it could be, it is dangerous. I've seen businesses where unfortunately, you know, through HMRC either initially rejecting the claim or opening up an inquiry that can last for months and months and months, and they're relying on that R&D tax credit, that it's unfortunately meant that the business has gone to the wall. So I think certainly strategically businesses need to, you know, certainly, you know, have it as something that's part of the plan, but not reliant on. And I also think going forward that it's about looking at the projects that you've got and look at the ones that are, you know, kind of assessing the opportunities, to see which ones are the strategically the most important, the ones that are most likely to be you know, successful and lead to commercial benefits for the business. I guess the other thing on that as well is potentially looking at ways to partner with other organisations, maybe bigger organisations that might be able to help to fund part of that R&D programme. So in a kind of collaborative manner, also looking at grant funding and stuff as well. One of the differences that with the new scheme previously, if you were an SME claiming R&D tax credits and then you got innovation grant funding that was notifiable state aid, the rate that you could claim R&D tax credits was reduced to the RDEC rate for the project or parts that were funded. Now it's the same rate. So actually we're seeing more and more businesses that are going, do you know what, it's really like, we really want to start looking at what grants are available. There's loads out there. There's some really good grants for businesses in Scotland. Scottish Enterprise have got some great R&D grants through the smart grants. But kind of further afield, we've got Innovate UK. There's a Horizon grants for European collaborations and Eureka. They're just some of the kind of big ones, but there's a number of other grants available. Anything you want to add to that, Scott?
No, no, you've covered everything there. I was going to talk about the grants bit, but you stole my thunder there, to be honest with you. But no, the grants thing is massive, because I've seen people when they've went and got a grant and they've came across me to do a claim. When it was back at the old rates, it was a substantial jump down you were getting for it, from like 20 or 25% to 10. It was a big jump down for people, and they weren't aware that going for a grant would hamper them when it came to it. So in a way, it's good now that you can get your grant and still have a decent R&D claim in it as well, to be honest with you.
Absolutely.
It's beneficial for everybody that way. But no, it's the grants thing is a massive thing. And I know there's only the other big thing for it we're going to talk about later, so I won't bring that up now.
Okay, no. So in terms of the compliance and risk management, when it comes to making R&D claims now, Scott, do you want to take the lead on this one? Because you're actually, again, you're submitting claims. You've seen firsthand. I know how it all works in theory. I don't submit claims.
Yeah, no, that's no problem at all. No problem at all, mate. Yeah, everything now, but HMRC are basically want the early warnings that you're submitting a claim. If you've never submitted a claim in the past 3 years, going forward, they're now wanting to know 6 months after your year end that your intention to submit a claim, and then they'll use their checks at that point to query it if they want to, so that you're sort of giving them a heads up straight away that you're preparing to do one. In addition to that, the additional information form is used to, you have to lodge that with HMRC before you can actually submit your CT600 with your R&D claim on it. This is almost like a copy of the R&D report, to be perfectly honest. You're giving them ahead of time before they actually get the CT600. And it's another way, I think we spoke about the other day, Derek, that companies, it was catching a lot of companies out, because some of the companies weren't doing the EIFs and they had no idea about what an EIF was. And that's when they started to catch out the companies that were the hooky companies, so to speak. But again, it's just another layer of thing, another extra thing to do, but it's making it hopefully a wee bit more secure, and HMRC will eventually get comfortable that people who are doing them are going to be actually legit and not try to take the mick out of things. And then we're talking about everything that prior to, was it 2023, that a report didn't have to go in. Before R&D, you didn't have to submit a report, you could just put in the figures. But now we've been practicing and putting in reports for years, but we've not been practicing, we've been doing it. But now going forward, it's compulsory, so it's good to have a good, robust R&D report covering all the bases, all the points. So when it goes into HMRC, the chances of anything bouncing back to you is minimal. If I don't know, I found it there's a balance. You don't want to go too technical, because they might just go, no, I want to ask more on this because I don't understand it. Or you don't want to go too simple, so it doesn't seem like it's a nice balance you want to get to be just in the middle.
I've heard somebody, I've heard this a few times actually, but I was speaking to someone in a technology business that provide technology to help advisors in this space, and they were speaking about where HMRC get like obviously the EIF is it's got a specific number of characters and set questions, but then when you've got the report, if there's like an 83-page report detailing the projects, and I can't say this for fact, but there is a suggestion that almost HMRC would just go, do you know what, just open up an inquiry and we'll ask the questions in the inquiry, as opposed to sitting there and reading an 83-page report. So yeah, I think keeping it concise is important. Not trying to overcomplicate things, because the problem we have, although HMRC are striving to improve this, is that the people that are reviewing this at HMRC's side are not experts in the field of science or technology that most clients are operating in. And therefore, it's really difficult for them to know where the baseline for the technology was when it started. Quite often they're relying in Google. There's been some horror stories. There was a case that went to first tier tribunal recently that HMRC lost for a software claim, where the caseworker from HMRC's side, it was the first time that they'd ever reviewed a software claim for R&D. They were not the right person to be doing that, but they rejected that. A lot of the stuff, it was kind of cookie cutter type responses from HMRC. It is improving, and HMRC, are spending a lot of money and a lot of resource to increase the knowledge and the capacity of their advisors, and they're looking at using technology to try and help them with it. But it's still, I think when you're submitting that claim, it is about making sure that it is very robust. I would say in terms of the EIF, one of the real positives with that is that you have to now obviously provide that overview of the projects, but you have to name your advisors, and that has given HMRC another area that they can then focus on. There are advisors that they know, and I won't name them on this webinar, but that they know and that they have issues with. There's been a big expose this week on a particular advisor, but I think any claims that are submitted with their agent code will probably be a higher risk than others. But that's a good thing, because previous to that, all HMRC had to go on was the SIC code of the business. And quite often for businesses, the SIC code that they started the business with might not be a true representation of what they're actually doing. So it meant that if you just happen to be in that code, the HMRC are looking at that point in time, your risk of inquiry was higher. Now, it's going to be based on information that the HMRC have that allow them to be more strategic and risk score businesses. For me, and this is not a plug, but I think we're past the point in time where companies can do R&D claims by themselves. I don't think it was ever a particularly good idea for businesses to do it themselves. But certainly now, I think using specialists, is going to give you a far greater chance of having a robust claim and having a defendable claim. Because the reality is, and Scott, you said it there, doesn't matter how good the report is, you still may get an HMRC inquiry. They still might open a compliance check, but having done all the work initially will make that process of dealing with that inquiry much easier, and it will certainly improve your likelihood of having the claim successfully approved in the long run. Something that, and this is a wee bit off tangent, but I just thought I'd say this. Quite often I speak to businesses and they say, "Oh no, I'm fine. We've been claiming R&D tax credits for years." And they think that because they've been claiming and because HMRC have paid out, or they've had the reduction in corporation tax, that means that they've got a successful R&D claim. It doesn't. It just means it's not been looked at. We have a self-assessment tax regime in the UK, which means that you self-assess and then HMRC might look at it later on, and if they do, then they open up an inquiry. Really, that's the only point I would say where you can say with certainty our claim has been approved, other than if you go down the advanced assurance route, which we're not really going to talk about today. It's not a route that I would suggest for most businesses to go down, but there is a place for it. But yeah, it's a common misconception, and Scott, I'm sure you'll have spoke to people, probably when you bring on, I'd imagine there'll be the odd new client that you guys bring on within the accountancy practice that's been claiming R&D tax credits, and you have to break the news to them that
it's not successful. We don't know, they could have looked at it or not, but unless you say they've been pulled and you went through the process and they've agreed it, then there's no way of telling if it's actually been checked or proved to be successful. As you said, it's not being checked. And that brings me on to when we talk about the best practices. That's what you spoke earlier about. It's always been a historical thing all the time. I think that's where everyone, clients and anyone who's looking to prepare an R&D claim should be trying to do it as they go, to keep the records as you go out through the year. Have a different code in your software that you're keeping, Zero, Sage or whatever, for all your R&D expenses, so you've got everything to hand. And then if anything does come in a do challenge, it's a lot easier and it's not as stressful than trying to apply and prove your costs, etc. to them. Because I think even if you've got an R&D claim, they can be quite hard on what you're claiming. They might, if they can't get you for not being an R&D, they might try and knock you down a couple of pegs for what your actual relief you're claiming for. So it's to have the best practice, have all those costs there, so that if they ever come a knocking, you can basically you can back up what you've put in, so to speak.
Yeah. No, I've seen, you know, a kind of shift. So I wouldn't say it was you know, becoming the kind of mainstay in terms of the way that people do it, but there are more businesses now that are looking to kind of do their R&D claims in a more contemporaneous manner, where it's you know, they're actually, you know, doing it in real time. Some of the clients that I work with that are doing it because of the fact that they're also utilizing like non-dilutive funding solutions where they can draw down on their R&D tax credits in year, and that's a reason for doing it. But even without that, I think it's certainly something that EY we were kind of pushing more for clients. I've seen a couple of the other kind of bigger R&D consultancies are starting to move into that more kind of real-time R&D kind of recording, for wanting a better word. But yeah, I think that's all. Anything like that. I mean, if you're leaving something to the end of the year and then some, you know, you get 9 months before you need to submit your accounts and stuff, you know, so you could be 18 months down the line, you know, or more before, and you're trying to think of something that happened a way back then and give detail on it. Whereas if you manage to kind of keep some of those notes at the time, it makes it a lot easier.
Rather than a big, massive task you've got to do,
Yeah.
you're breaking it down into wee small segments. It's a lot easier because if it's a big task, you've got to try and put that off as much as possible. Whereas if you're doing it as you go, it's not as much of a time burden on you. And the businesses we're talking about, time's precious.
Yeah, absolutely. Right, let's kick on to another one of the not so good bits in the changes that we've seen, and that is overseas R&D expenditure. So under the new rules for overseas expenditure that's incurred from the 1st of April this year, that no longer qualifies for R&D tax credits. Initially, the plan was that they were going to bring that in last year, but they decided to kick that down the road a little bit. In terms of the reason why, you know, at policy level, it's been decided that they want to see more R&D being done on UK shores, which, you know, I can guess the reasons for that. Personally, I think that it's a negative. I think, you know, a lot of the businesses I work with do use overseas subcontractors for some, or in some cases, all of their R&D. And now, you know, if you are going to use overseas, what subcontractor or not, but if you're going to do it overseas, unfortunately, you can't claim it under the R&D tax credit scheme. Obviously, you can still make those, you know, deduct those costs within your tax return, but you don't get that the enhanced rate. There are some specific reasons and specific circumstances where you can, and we'll touch on that on the next slide. But Scott, is that something, well, first of all, what's your thoughts on it? And secondly, is it something that for the clients that you deal with, is that going to have an impact on them?
At the moment, the ones I've been doing, most of the stuff is UK based, so there's not been a lot of overseas. But when I'm talking to people about it, there is some people who might use some people like in Europe or maybe even the US for doing bits of stuff. So it can hamper them, and it's just it is a negative. You're correct. The
Yeah.
UK in a nutshell just basically wanted the money spent in-house effectively. They want to just try and grow our economy and bring everything, keep everything in the country rather than because also you're actually giving your ideas away to other countries as well. They might be seeing that as a thing we give you getting people to work on your stuff.
And they consider that. I think, I mean, without getting going down into a rabbit hole where we probably don't want to go around kind of politics and stuff like that. Certainly, post Brexit, I think that the UK, we should be trying to work more collaboratively with other countries and utilising that, and it feels a wee bit kind of insular for us to do that. But I'm sure somebody who's far more intelligent than me has done worked the numbers and thought this is a great idea. Only time will tell as to whether or not it is something that's beneficial. I did mention, however, that there are situations where you still can claim. Now, the situations that you absolutely can't claim is where you say, well, we decided to use someone in Estonia, for example, because it's quite big for kind of software development type stuff. There's a big ecosystem there, because it was cheaper. HMRC do not want to know. They don't care whether it was commercially beneficial for you to do it. That is not a good reason. So if you're doing it because it's commercially beneficial for your business, great, but you can't claim R&D tax credits for it. If, however, you are a company that is, let's say, in the pharmaceutical industry, or I had a client who were involved in cleaning electronic equipment for basically developing really kind of high tech electronics, and they had to clean these kind of these machines down to it was like micron levels, so that's like 1/1000th of a millimeter or whatever, but it was really small to make sure that there were no particles or anything on it, because it would impact when they're working on circuit boards and things like that. And I can't remember where in the world. I think it was the US. I'm going to stick with that, but there was only one lab in the world that they could then send these over to test to that level of detail, to make sure that it cleaned these kind of very expensive kind of robotic kind of machines. And that would be something that I would think you would be able to claim, or you would have a good chance of being able to claim for something like that, because it's the only place that it can be done. Likewise, if you're a pharmaceutical business and there's only one lab in the world, or there's only a handful, but they don't happen to be in the UK, I think you could argue that. The other side of it is where you have to be kind of the geological kind of factors on site aren't present in the UK. So again, I can think of a business that I was working with that were using drones to better identify potential kind of areas for mining very like ores and stuff like that. But it was in Africa that they were doing that. Now, you're not really going to be able to do that work in somewhere in Scotland. I was going to say up in Glasgow Green, just because I happened to be there last night playing football. But you have to be on site. You have to be there in order to be able to test that. In those real world conditions. So that's the type of things that do qualify. Scott, have you got any examples off the top of your head that you think that you could add to that?
No, similar to yourself, but it could even just do the climate here. It has to be, if you're doing some work and had to be done in a really hot, humid climate, the UK is not going to cut that. If you need to go and try and outsource that to a certain place to get the tests run, whatever your projects, then I can't see why that wouldn't qualify, because at the end of the day, if you're doing it for the sunshine and the heat, it's not going to be based in Scotland. We only get about 2 days a year, so
yeah.
And we've had that.
Or you need to be very, very good with your testing
Yes.
so that you can get those 2 days in April for the sunshine. But yeah, no, you're absolutely right. So like I said, there are set circumstances where HMRC will accept that, but it's something that you absolutely need to make sure that you have checked with a specialist advisor and had the advice on it. Otherwise, you're opening yourself up to a potential compliance check, and if that is deemed not to be qualifying, then you will have to pay back the benefit you've had, plus interest, plus potentially penalties as well. So yes. Anyway, let's move on. In terms of choosing the right R&D tax advisor, I mean, I did kind of give the game away there a wee bit. I went too early. I got a bit excited and said, like, you absolutely should be using advisors, but not to turn this into an opportunity to promote simply R&D. I think what certainly my idea here is that we give people a bit of a kind of idea across the board of what's available and what they should be thinking of. It is far more complex now. There is no doubt about that. You really need to be up to speed with everything that's going on. Scott, you touched on it with the AIF. Initially, when that came into play in August last year, in the first month, can't remember the number, but it was a significant number of submissions were made without the AIF being included. And while I can't say, oh, that was definitely this or that, there was something that showed how many of those were using advisors that didn't differentiate between general accountant and a specialist. But it seems to be, certainly, from speaking to people in the industry, and including a lot of accountants that I know, a lot of them just weren't fully up to speed. Now, as someone who was, as I say, lives and breathes this, I'm like, how could you possibly not have realised that, like, this AIF had to be submitted? But because there's so many changes, it is hard to keep up. I find it difficult, and I am fully submerged in the R&D industry. But there's things that you're kind of, oh God, I write that or this, and try to remember what date that came in, and navigating the R&D environment at the moment is really tough. So having someone that knows the regulations is on top of it, and certainly in the know as to what's coming down the road is really important. Somebody that knows how to deal with HMRC and has dealt with HMRC inquiries, again, also really important. There are still some advisors out there who are going, we've never had an inquiry into an R&D claim. If you've never had an inquiry into an R&D claim, you are either exceptionally lucky, you are maybe fibbing a wee bit, and I say that, I try to make that as nice as possible, or you're not doing a lot of R&D claims. It's as simple as that. So you need to actually knowing someone that goes, yeah, do you know what? We've had inquiries and we've dealt with them. We know how to deal with them. That's important. But I think it's also important weighing up the advisors versus that risk side of things. You don't necessarily need to go to a big four advisor, and as someone who is ex Big Four. You know, I feel as if I'm able to say that there is a benefit, absolutely. And for large businesses with really complex structures and lots of overseas subsidiaries and stuff like that, maybe you do want to be working with a Big Four advisor, but you're going to pay for that as well. You know, for some, it may be that you want to go where an R&D boutique and work alongside your existing accountant. Or for others, you might want to look at somebody like Simply R&D who can do the R&D stuff you know, on its own, or can actually do that and your accountancy stuff and marry it all together. Another thing that I have seen just recently, and it's, I'd say, a very new alternative, but an alternative that I think has got some promise to it, is looking at an in-house team. For most businesses, you do not need an in-house R&D advisor. You know, they would have 3 months worth of work, and then the rest of the time they're sitting there twiddling their thumbs. But actually having someone, if you're established, you've been claiming R&D for quite a while, maybe having a fractional R&D manager could be an option that's worth looking at. Certainly compared to some of the fees that you would pay from one of the boutique R&D advisors, I think you would pay a fraction of the cost to have someone that's part of your team, and actually there's a lot of benefits to that as well. So that's my kind of take on it. I definitely think it's something that people should be spending more time on, to pick the advisor that they work with, and make sure that it's the one that's right for you. On top of all of that, as if that wasn't enough, make sure that you can get on with the people, because that does make a big difference. If you're working with people where you've got a bit of rapport with them, it helps, because you know, you're going to be spending a wee bit of time with them now, because it is more complicated. And if there's an inquiry, you want to make sure that somebody that's going to be there, you know, to support you through it as well, and that's not going to kind of be too flaky, for wanting a better description. Scott, anything you want to add to that?
No, I'll just touch on your saying about making sure you've got someone. I think having an advisor, it's quite interesting to think about the in-house one for like a fractional sort of time of this year. They're only in there so often, but definitely have an advisor who knows what they're doing, who are looking forward, and is going to try and keep you on the right path. That's all I can say. And start trying to keep things ahead of time, or live, up to date, rather than always going back the way.
Yeah.
Because when you look at someone who's maybe coming back and finding it for the first time, try to go back 2 years and try to think about what they were doing is no easy task, and it's a big job for people, and they've not got the time for doing it. So it's just try to keep ahead of it, and rather than letting it all build up.
Yeah, absolutely. I am conscious of the time. I thought there was a chance that this might happen, because well, I certainly like to talk, as you will attest to, I'm sure, Scott.
Yep.
But actually the time's kind of flown in. I do want to make sure that we keep some time for the Q&A, but we probably won't have as much time as we'd initially thought. Yeah, so let's crack on. We've got a couple more to go. In terms of the future kind of planning and stuff, I mean, we kind of touched on that quite a lot in the last slide, but again, I think it's really important to stay on top of you know, the current approach from HMRC, the strategies, the stuff that they're doing. I mean, even though there's the regulatory changes which, you know, get announced, and your advisors should keep you up to date with that. Actually just understanding what's happening, you know, at that kind of granular level, you know, kind of the word on the street, so to speak, is really useful. So I think making sure that you know, that your advisors that you're working with know that, and that they are forewarning you of anything that they're seeing, whether that's, you know, HMRC looking at specific industries, or, you know, things that they're wanting to see within the report itself. Just make sure that you know, that you've got someone there, whether it's internal or whether it's your external advisors, that is on top of that. I would say it's probably better. Yous are all going to be busy business people. So having someone that can do that for you is really important. I did mention before, kind of reducing that reliance on R&D tax credits, you know, as opposed to a must-have. It's a nice to have. I think going forward for businesses, slightly different, I would say, for R&D intensive businesses, because for them, that there is more of a reliance on it because they're just, generally speaking, they're burning through cash, and the more they can get in, the more that they can advance their innovation and get it to market. But also consider other funding options, whether that is the first port of call for me would absolutely be looking at grant funding. Are there any grants that you can potentially apply for? But then also looking at other things like the non-dilutive funding options that are available. They can be quite a good way of utilising your R&D tax credit spending in a kind of a better way. But yeah, on top of that, obviously other lending that might be useful. And a good advisor will be able to give you at least a steer on that, and should have connections. Scott, anything you want to add to that one?
No, I'll just be repeating myself, mate. It's just mostly from the last one, as you said.
Cool. So yeah, the landscape today, I think it is there obviously are challenges within the R&D industry. There's a lot of negative, but it's still something that for businesses that are innovating, this is one of the best incentives available to you to help you to grow your business. And small claims are still very valuable. In fact, I would argue are more valuable. Most of the businesses I've worked with, I've had clients where they've had a benefit of over £1 million, and they've went, "Oh, cheers." And I've had clients where I've got them back £10,000, and they have been delighted and have known exactly what they're going to spend that money on. So actually, small claims are extremely valuable. We probably don't have time to go into the success stories and stuff at the moment, and I think we've kind of covered the submissions and ways to do it. Anything you want to add to that slide, Scott?
No, just that they're still valuable. Small claims are valuable, and that's why essentially we were created at Simple R&D is to make those more still a viable option for people, because if you're doing the work, you may as well be getting the relief.
Awesome. So we're coming towards the end. David, I don't know if you've got any questions that have been asked. I know quite often with these webinars, people are reluctant to ask questions kind of live. Have you got any that you want to run past us? Have you seen any? I can't see them on my screen. David, if you're still about.
Yes, so first of all, thank you very much indeed for the presentations. Very interesting. And to answer your question, yes, I do have a specific question. And also, there were a couple of people who asked in general when we were promoting this event. And so I'll start with that because it came up so often. So the question was, how much is likely to be saved in terms of corporation tax relief? That was part of the question. The other half of it was, many businesses are looking at automation at the moment, and they're saying, look, these projects are going to cost somewhere in the region of £100,000. So putting those two bits together, I think, is a good question to start with. If I'm investing £100,000 and it qualifies, what level of tax relief are we talking about?
Yep. Scott, do you want to take that, or do you want me to take it?
No, I was saying it's just, if they're putting £100,000, as the graph shows, because of the rate changes in the corporation tax, it varies. It goes from 14.2 to 16 or 14 point, about 15% roughly. Your tax rate is going
it's
to be
about 15.
Because of all the rate changes and all that in corporation tax, so you would effectively save £15,000 on that.
Yeah.
For the 100.
And just for anybody, if you're thinking, what do you mean by that? It's obviously now we have, and Scott, you're far more expert than me in this, but what is it for turnover profit up to X
50,
amount?
it's 19%, and then above,
and then you've got this marginal
50
rate.
to 50, I just call it 26, and then if your profit's over 250, you're 25%. corporation tax.
Which is where it differs now because of the fact it's an above the line tax credit, isn't it? Just for anybody in case you're thinking, so why can you not give us an exact figure? It depends on your own tax position. But yeah, so if you spent £100,000, you're looking at somewhere around £15,000 benefit. Whether that is a reduction in corporation tax or for loss-making businesses, that would be obviously a subsidy that they could get as a cash payment. Again, there's certain circumstances around that depending on your PAYE that you have within the business, because it's capped around that. I'm not went into that today. They're just it's not massively complex, but it's just going away into the weeds. Also depends whether or not that business qualifies as a R&D intensive business as well, so it could be higher. I guess the other thing I would say, and it's true with anything, is automation, AI, all of this kind of stuff. There's definitely potential for it to qualify, but the key thing is it has to fit the qualifying parameters, which is you have to be trying to make an advancement in a field of science or technology, and it has to be something that's not readily deducible by another competent professional. So a lot of the automation stuff that's going in now, it's stuff that you probably say, well, that's not going to qualify. You have to be making something that's an appreciable improvement to what's out there in the market or how it's done. That's not to say that it wouldn't qualify, but it's just important to note that. Any other questions, David?
Yep, and one other, we're actually just over time, so if you could keep it brief. This has cropped up a few times. So several people in the construction sector have said it's really hard to work out what you would call R&D because we're solving problems every day. We're having to find ways to make better materials or lighter materials. So where's this kind of dividing line?
Excuse me. Construction is, I would say, one of the most challenging areas for R&D. I think it's certainly an area that HMRC have got in their sights for R&D because there's been a lot of people claiming that it shouldn't be. But also I'd say that there's also a huge amount of businesses that are absolutely doing things that I would think merit an R&D tax credit claim, or at least a conversation around it, that haven't even looked at it. So it's important. There is another thing around one of the changes, and again, we just don't have time to go into it, but around where the R&D sits, the rules around that, and it's particularly important in construction, have changed as to who can claim, whether it's the end client, because they've subcontracted the work to a construction business. If they know that there's R&D that needs to be carried out, they could claim it. If it's something that their subcontract, a building company, construction company are doing work, but the client hasn't stipulated R&D, but they have to do R&D in order to be able to carry that out, then they can claim it. But it's really important that it's in the contracts now. So you need to make sure that you've got that bit kind of nailed down. Again, the key bit from this is if you're in that sector and you're thinking about making an R&D claim, absolutely speak to an advisor.
Yeah.
Okay, so very last question, and again, please keep it brief. I respect that we're over time.
David, I can't do brief.
So very last is, what about pre-revenue micro SMEs?
So they can claim. I touched on it just very slightly there around the cap that exists for those businesses in terms of what their PAYE wage bill is. It's linked to that in terms of the benefit they can get. It's not that they can't get it, but in terms of getting a cash benefit, again, it's one of those ones you need to speak to someone. What I would say is that is one of the areas now that I would say that's been most underserved, because most of the R&D advisors out there and the bigger companies just look at that and go, there's no money in it. There's no money in it for them. So it's certainly something that I'm always happy to try and help those businesses because I'm really, really passionate about it. And I know certainly from speaking to Scott and from the rest of you guys that it's something that the team at Simply R&D would always be willing to have that conversation. But without getting into all the nitty gritty of it, I think that's as much as I can say. Scott, do you want to add anything to that?
No, definitely. I agree with what you said. You're capped by your PAYE and your national insurance contributions, but it's definitely still worthwhile doing. 100%.
Okay, right. Well, really appreciate all of that, and to respect everyone's time, the session is now finished. If anyone would like to submit questions, you've got our contact details. Please just get in touch, and you can either have the questions or we can organise a meeting. So in the meantime, thank you very much to everyone who's attended.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers. Thank you.
Have a great day. Bye now.
Bye.